A 45-year-old billionaire CEO panics when he discovers he's lost his wallet while trying to pay for parking in a dangerous Detroit neighborhood. A 12-year-old homeless girl who sleeps on sidewalks with her pet dog witnesses the scene and offers her only coins to help him. Touched by the child's generosity, he promises to return and reward her. Days later, the girl finds an expensive leather briefcase dropped near the parking lot. Inside, she discovers documents from Morrison Industries and is shocked to see the CEO's surname is identical to her own name, the only trace she has of her unknown origins. Determined to return the belongings, she walks miles to the corporate skyscraper. The CEO, impressed by the girl's honesty, decides to transform her life forever. But when investigating her past, a devastating truth emerges. She is the daughter he never knew existed, born from a relationship that ended tragically 13 years ago. Before we begin, if this story touches your heart, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear about the power of unexpected connections. Your support helps us share more inspiring stories like this one. The autumn rain of October 15, 2023, turned Detroit's Corktown district into a maze of puddles and shadows. Robert Morrison, 45, stood frozen beside his midnight blue Bentley, his manicured hands patting down his $3,000 suit for the third time. The parking attendant, a weathered man in his 60s, waited with barely concealed impatience. "Sir, it's $20 for the day," the attendant repeated, his voice cutting through the steady drumbeat of rain on metal roofing. Robert's mind raced. In his 45 years, he had never found himself in such a ridiculous predicament. As CEO of Morrison Industries, a company worth $2.8 billion, he controlled manufacturing plants across 3 states. Yet here he stood, unable to pay $20 for parking because his wallet had vanished somewhere between his penthouse and this godforsaken neighborhood. "I seem to have misplaced my wallet," Robert said, his voice tight with embarrassment. He glanced around the area, abandoned storefronts, broken streetlights, and the kind of urban decay that made even seasoned Detroit natives nervous after dark. "Perhaps you accept digital payments?" The attendant shook his head slowly. "Cash only, buddy. Always has been." The irony wasn't lost on Robert. He had come to this area to survey a potential acquisition, a small manufacturing plant that had caught his attention during quarterly reviews. The owner, desperate to sell before bankruptcy, had insisted on meeting at this remote location. Now Robert found himself stranded in a place where his usual solutions, credit cards, corporate accounts, executive assistants, held no power. As he contemplated calling his driver, a small voice broke through his spiraling thoughts. "Excuse me, mister." Robert turned to see a girl, no more than 12 years old, emerging from the shadows of a nearby building. She was small for her age, with tangled brown hair that hadn't seen a proper cut in months. Her clothes, a faded Disney sweatshirt and patched jeans, hung loose on her thin frame. Beside her sat a medium-sized dog, some kind of mixed breed with intelligent brown eyes and a coat that had seen better days. "I couldn't help but notice you're having trouble," the girl continued, her voice steady despite her obvious youth. In her small hand, she held a collection of crumpled bills and loose change. "I have some money if you need it." Robert stared at her, genuinely speechless. In his world of board meetings and corporate negotiations, kindness often came with strings attached. Yet this child, who clearly had nothing, was offering to help a complete stranger. "Sweetheart, that's very kind of you, but I couldn't possibly—" "It's okay," she interrupted gently. She approached the attendant and carefully counted out $20, a mix of ones, fives, and quarters. "This should cover it." The attendant looked between Robert and the girl, his expression softening slightly. He took the money and waved toward the Bentley. "You're all set." Robert watched in amazement as this 12-year-old child, who was clearly homeless, judging by the sleeping bag rolled up against the building, had just solved his problem with a generosity that shamed him. He knelt down to her eye level, noticing for the first time how bright and intelligent her green eyes were, despite the dirt smudged on her cheeks. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Emma," she replied, scratching behind her dog's ears. "This is Charlie." "Emma, I'm Robert Morrison, and I promise you, I will come back to repay your kindness. You have my word." Emma smiled, an expression that transformed her entire face. "It's okay, Mr. Morrison. Charlie and I help people when we can. That's what my mom always said we should do." As Robert drove away in his Bentley, he couldn't stop thinking about Emma's words. His rearview mirror showed her returning to her makeshift shelter, the dog faithfully by her side. In 30 years of business dealings, he had never encountered such genuine kindness without expectation of return. That night, in his glass-walled penthouse overlooking the Detroit River, Robert couldn't shake the image of Emma's smile or the weight of those $20, money that had clearly meant everything to her but nothing to him. He made a mental note to return the next day, but a crisis at his Memphis plant demanded his immediate attention. Days turned into a week, and the memory of the homeless girl became buried under quarterly reports and acquisition meetings. Meanwhile, Emma returned each night to the same spot near the parking lot. Charlie curled up beside her for warmth. She never mentioned her act of kindness to anyone. There was no one to tell. But she found herself wondering about the well-dressed man with the expensive car and whether he would keep his promise. October 22nd, 2023, exactly 1 week after their first encounter, dawned crisp and clear. Emma woke to Charlie's gentle nudging, his way of reminding her that they needed to start their daily routine. At 12 years old, Emma had developed the survival skills of someone much older. She knew which restaurants threw away still edible food, which libraries stayed open late and didn't mind quiet visitors, and which areas of the city were safe for a girl and her dog. After sharing a day-old sandwich she'd found behind a bakery, Emma and Charlie began their morning walk. Their route typically took them through the nicer parts of downtown, where Emma could sometimes earn a few dollars helping elderly people carry groceries or returning lost items to store owners. As they passed the parking lot where she'd met Robert Morrison, something caught Emma's eye. Near the storm drain, partially hidden under a pile of wet leaves, was an expensive-looking leather briefcase. Emma approached cautiously. In her experience, anything of value in this neighborhood usually meant trouble. But as she brushed away the leaves, she recognized the initials embossed in gold on the leather, RM. Her heart skipped a beat. This had to belong to the businessman she'd helped a week ago. With Charlie watching protectively, Emma carefully opened the briefcase. Inside she found documents that made her breath catch in her throat. Corporate papers, financial statements, and most shocking of all, a business card that read, Robert Morrison, Chief Executive Officer, Morrison Industries. Emma stared at the name Morrison, her mind reeling. For as long as she could remember, that had been her last name too, Emma Morrison. It was the only connection she had to a past she couldn't remember. Her mother, Sarah, had died in a car accident 3 years ago, when Emma was just 9. Before that tragedy, they had lived in a small apartment across town, and Sarah had worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. Emma had always wondered about her father. Her mother had been vague about him, saying only that sometimes good people make difficult choices, and that Emma should never blame him for not being there. Sarah had kept no photographs, no letters, no evidence of Emma's paternal lineage except for that last name. Now, holding these documents, Emma felt a mixture of hope and disbelief. Could this successful businessman be related to her? Was it just an incredible coincidence, or was there something more? "What do you think, Charlie?" she whispered to her faithful companion. The dog tilted his head, as if considering the question seriously. Emma made a decision that would change everything. Instead of taking the briefcase to the police or simply leaving it where she found it, she would return it personally to Robert Morrison. She needed to see his reaction when she told him her name. She needed to know if the coincidence meant anything. The walk to downtown Detroit's business district took Emma and Charlie nearly 2 hours. The Morrison Industries building was impossible to miss. A gleaming 30-story tower of glass and steel that seemed to touch the clouds. Emma had never been inside such an impressive building, and the contrast between her world and this one felt overwhelming. In the pristine marble lobby, Emma approached the security desk, where a professional-looking woman in her 40s sat behind a computer screen. "Excuse me," Emma said, suddenly aware of how out of place she looked in her worn clothes and with Charlie by her side. "I found something that belongs to Mr. Morrison, and I'd like to return it." The security guard, whose nameplate read Janet Wilson, looked down at Emma with a mixture of surprise and skepticism. Her eyes took in the girl's appearance, the tangled hair, the too big clothes, the loyal dog sitting perfectly at attention. "I'm sorry, honey, but pets aren't allowed in the building, and Mr. Morrison is a very busy man. You can leave whatever you found with me, and I'll make sure he gets it." Emma shook her head firmly. "I need to give this to him personally. It's important." Janet sighed, clearly used to dealing with all sorts of people trying to get access to the CEO. "Look, sweetheart, Mr. Morrison doesn't meet with people without appointments, especially not—" She stopped herself, but Emma caught the implication. "Especially not homeless kids," Emma finished quietly. Janet had the grace to look embarrassed. "That's not what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant," Emma replied, but without anger. "And you're probably right, but this is his briefcase, and I think he'd want it back directly." She opened the briefcase slightly, just enough for Janet to see the expensive contents and the corporate documents inside. Janet's expression changed immediately. "Where did you find this?" Janet asked, her tone shifting from dismissive to concerned. "Near the parking lot on Michigan Avenue. Last week I helped Mr. Morrison when he lost his wallet. He probably dropped this then." Janet studied Emma more carefully, noting the intelligence in her green eyes and the way she spoke, articulate despite her circumstances. There was something about this girl that didn't fit the usual profile of someone looking for a handout. "Wait here," Janet said finally. She picked up her phone and dialed an extension. "Mr. Morrison? I have someone in the lobby who says she found your briefcase." "Yes, sir, the one you've been looking for. It's a young girl, maybe 12 years old." "Yes, I'll send her up." Janet hung up and looked at Emma with new respect. 32nd floor, executive elevator is on your right. But I'm sorry, the dog really can't—" "That's okay," Emma said, kneeling down to Charlie. "Wait for me here, boy. I'll be back soon." As the elevator climbed toward the top floors, Emma's heart pounded. In just a few minutes, she would face Robert Morrison again. This time, she wouldn't just be the homeless girl who helped a stranger. This time, she would be Emma Morrison, returning what belonged to a man who might, just might, be the father she'd never known. The elevator doors opened onto the 30th floor with a soft chime, revealing a world Emma had only seen in movies. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Detroit's skyline, while elegant furniture and abstract art created an atmosphere of refined success. A woman in her 30s, impeccably dressed in a navy suit, approached Emma with a warm but professional smile. "You must be Emma," the woman said. "I'm Patricia Walsh, Mr. Morrison's executive assistant. He's been very eager to meet with you." Emma nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of the briefcase in her small hands. Patricia led her down a hallway lined with photographs, images of manufacturing plants, ribbon-cutting ceremonies. and Robert Morrison shaking hands with various officials and business leaders. "Mr. Morrison has been looking for that briefcase for over a week," Patricia explained as they walked. "He was convinced it was gone forever. You're quite the hero for finding it." They stopped at massive double doors made of rich mahogany. Patricia knocked once and opened the door, ushering Emma into an office that was larger than the entire apartment she used to share with her mother. Robert Morrison stood behind his desk, which was positioned to take advantage of the spectacular city view. When he saw Emma, his face lit up with genuine recognition and surprise. "Emma!" he exclaimed, coming around the desk to greet her. "I can't believe it's you. I've been thinking about you all week, wondering how you were doing." Up close, in better lighting than their first meeting, Emma studied Robert's features more carefully. He was tall, probably 6 feet, with graying brown hair and those same green eyes that looked back at her from mirrors. The similarity was striking, but Emma forced herself to stay focused on why she was there. "I found your briefcase, Mr. Morrison," she said, extending it toward him. "It was near where we met last week." Robert accepted the briefcase with obvious relief, but his attention remained fixed on Emma. "This is incredible. Do you have any idea how important these documents are? There are contracts in here worth millions of dollars." Emma shook her head. "I didn't look through everything. I just saw your name and knew it belonged to you. Most people would have kept this, you know," Robert said. His voice filled with admiration. "The briefcase alone is worth more than most people make in a month. But you walked all the way here to return it." "It wasn't mine to keep," Emma replied simply. Robert studied this remarkable 12-year-old who seemed to operate by a moral code that many adults had abandoned. Her honesty was remarkable, but there was something else about her that nagged at his consciousness, something familiar that he couldn't quite place. "Emma, I owe you much more than $20 now," Robert said, settling into a chair across from her. "Tell me about yourself. Where do you live? Where are your parents?" For the first time since entering his office, Emma's composure wavered slightly. "My mom died 3 years ago in a car accident. I don't have anyone else." Robert's expression immediately shifted to one of concern and compassion. "I'm so sorry. That must have been incredibly difficult for you. What about your father?" Emma took a deep breath, knowing this moment could change everything. "I don't know who my father is. My mum never talked about him. The only thing I know is that my last name is Morrison, same as yours." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Robert's face went completely still, his green eyes, so similar to Emma's, widening with shock. "Morrison," he repeated quietly. "Your last name is Morrison?" "Emma Morrison," she confirmed, watching his reaction carefully. "I know it's probably just a coincidence, but when I saw your name on those papers—" Robert stood up abruptly and walked to the window, his mind racing. Morrison wasn't an uncommon name, but the timing, the location, and something about Emma's features were triggering memories he had tried to bury for over a decade. 13 years ago, he had been involved with a woman named Sarah Chen. She had been beautiful, kind, and working as a nurse at Detroit General Hospital. Their relationship had been intense, but brief. Robert had been focused on building his company, working 18-hour days and traveling constantly. When Sarah told him she was pregnant, Robert had panicked. He was only 32, not ready for fatherhood, and terrified that a child would derail his ambitious plans. He had given Sarah money for what he assumed would be an abortion and had left for a 6-month business expansion to Europe. When he returned, Sarah had moved away, leaving no forwarding address. Robert had convinced himself she had ended the pregnancy and moved on with her life. He had never tried to find her, telling himself it was better for everyone involved. Now, looking at Emma's earnest face and intelligent green eyes, eyes that looked so much like his own, Robert felt the full weight of a terrible possibility. Emma, he said slowly, turning back to face her. What was your mother's name? Sarah, Emma replied. Sarah Chen. She was a nurse before? Before she died. Robert's legs nearly gave out beneath him. He gripped the edge of his desk for support, his face draining of color. Sarah Chen. The woman he had loved and abandoned. The woman who had been carrying his child. A child he had assumed would never be born. Mr. Morrison? Emma asked, alarmed by his reaction. Are you okay? Robert stared at this incredible, generous, brave little girl who had been surviving on the streets while he lived in luxury. This child who shared his eyes, his name, and his stubbornness. This daughter he had never known existed. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Emma wasn't just some homeless girl who had shown him kindness. She was his daughter, his flesh and blood. The child he had unknowingly abandoned 12 years ago was the same child who had saved him with her generosity just 1 week before. But how could he tell her? How could he explain that her father, the man she had been wondering about her entire life, was standing right in front of her, having lived in wealth and comfort while she struggled to survive on the streets? The silence in Robert's office stretched between them like an ocean. Emma watched as a series of emotions played across his face. Shock, recognition, guilt, and something that looked like profound grief. She had seen enough pain in her 12 years to recognize it when it stared back at her. Mr. Morrison, Emma repeated, her voice smaller now. You knew my mother, didn't you? Robert slowly returned to his chair, his hands trembling slightly as he processed the magnitude of what he was facing. This wasn't just about returning a briefcase anymore. This was about a choice he had made 13 years ago, a choice that had consequences he never imagined. Yes, Emma, he said quietly. I knew your mother. Sarah was. She was a wonderful woman. Emma leaned forward, her eyes bright with hope and curiosity. Tell me about her, about when you knew her. Robert's heart ached as he looked at his daughter, though she didn't know that's what she was yet. How could he explain that he had been a coward, that when faced with the responsibility of fatherhood, he had run away and left Sarah to face everything alone? Your mother was one of the kindest people I ever met, Robert began carefully. She worked at Detroit General Hospital as a nurse. She had this way of making everyone around her feel better just by being there. Emma smiled. The first genuine smile Robert had seen from her since she'd arrived. She was like that at home, too. Even when we didn't have much money, she would find ways to help our neighbors. She said, that's what good people do. They help others, even when it's hard. The words hit Robert like physical blows. Like Sarah had been teaching their daughter the same values that Emma had demonstrated, by helping him in the parking lot. Values that he, her father, had apparently forgotten in his pursuit of wealth and success. Emma, Robert said, struggling to find the right words. When I knew your mother, I was very different than I am now. I was young and focused only on building my business. I made some choices that I'm not proud of. Emma studied his face with the perceptive gaze of someone who had learned to read people's true intentions at an early age. You're my father, aren't you? The direct question caught Robert off guard. He had been trying to figure out how to tell her, but Emma had simply asked. Her intelligence and intuition were remarkable, qualities she had clearly inherited from both her parents. Robert nodded slowly, unable to speak, past the emotion clogging his throat. Emma sat back in her chair, processing this confirmation of what she had suspected since seeing his name. Why didn't you come back? Mom always said you must have had your reasons, but I never understood what could be more important than... She didn't finish the sentence, but Robert heard the unspoken words. More important than us. I was scared, Robert admitted, the words coming out in a rush. When your mother told me she was pregnant, I panicked. I wasn't ready to be a father. I was working all the time, traveling constantly, and I convinced myself that you and your mother would be better off without me. Emma's expression didn't change, but Robert could see her processing this information. Mom never said anything bad about you. She just said that sometimes people make difficult choices and that I shouldn't judge you for not being there. The grace in her response made Robert's guilt even more profound. Sarah had protected him in Emma's eyes, even after he had abandoned them both. Your mother was incredibly generous to tell you that, Robert said. The truth is, I made a terrible mistake. I gave her some money and left for Europe hoping that she would choose not to have the baby. When I came back 6 months later, she had moved away. I never tried to find her because I assumed. You assumed she had gotten rid of me, Emma finished quietly. Robert nodded, ashamed. I convinced myself it was for the best. I told myself that a child would be better off not having a father who wasn't ready for the responsibility. Emma was quiet for a long moment, staring out the massive windows at the city where she had been struggling to survive. When she spoke again, her voice was steady but thoughtful. Mom always said that people deserve second chances if they really want to change. She said that mistakes don't define who we are. It's what we do after we realize we've made them that matters. Robert stared at his daughter in amazement. At 12 years old, Emma was showing him more wisdom and forgiveness than he had any right to expect. She was everything Sarah had been, kind, generous, and willing to see the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. Emma, I want to change everything for you, Robert said urgently. I want to make up for all the years I wasn't there. I want to give you a home, an education, everything you should have had from the beginning. Emma tilted her head, considering his words. What about Charlie? Robert was momentarily confused. Charlie? My dog. He's been with me since Mom died. I found him on the street, and we've been taking care of each other. I can't leave him behind. And the fact that Emma's first concern was for her loyal companion, rather than for the luxury he was offering, told Robert everything he needed to know about his daughter's character. She had been shaped by hardship and loss, but those experiences had made her compassionate rather than bitter. Of course, Charlie comes with us, Robert said. We'll make sure he has the best care possible. Emma smiled then, a real smile that transformed her entire face. He'll like that. He's been worried about me lately. I think he knows I haven't been feeling well. Robert's parental instincts, dormant for 12 years, suddenly roared to life. What do you mean you haven't been feeling well? Emma shrugged, as if her health was a minor detail. Just tired lately, and sometimes my chest hurts when I run. It's probably nothing. But Robert's expression had shifted to one of alarm. Emma, when was the last time you saw a doctor? Not since Mom died, Emma admitted. We couldn't really afford doctors unless it was an emergency. Robert was already reaching for his phone. We're getting you to a doctor today, right now. For the first time since entering his office, Emma looked uncertain. I'm sure it's nothing serious, Mr. Morrison. It's Dad, Robert corrected gently. And we're not taking any chances with your health, not when I just found you. Within an hour, Robert had arranged for Emma to be seen by Dr. Margaret Rodriguez, the head of pediatric cardiology at Detroit Children's Hospital, one of the finest medical facilities in the state. As they sat in the pristine waiting room, Emma clutched a temporary visitor's badge while Charlie, now wearing a service dog vest that Robert had somehow procured, sat alertly by her side. I've never been in a hospital this nice, Emma whispered, taking in the colorful murals and child-friendly decor that was worlds away from the sterile environment she remembered from her mother's final days. Robert watched his daughter's face, noting how pale she looked under the bright fluorescent lights. What he had initially attributed to poor nutrition and lack of sleep now seemed more concerning. The way she occasionally pressed her hand to her chest, the slight bluish tint around her lips that he was only now noticing. These weren't just signs of homelessness. Emma Morrison, a nurse called from the examination room doorway. As they walked toward the room, Robert couldn't help but notice how Emma moved more slowly than other children her age, how she seemed to conserve her energy with each step. Guilt washed over him again. While he had been living in comfort, his daughter had been struggling not just with poverty, but potentially with a serious medical condition. Dr. Rodriguez was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and gentle hands. She had been briefed on Emma's situation, a recently discovered daughter of a prominent businessman who'd been living on the streets. Such cases weren't entirely uncommon in Detroit, but they never failed to move her. "Hello, Emma," Dr. Rodriguez said warmly. "I'm Dr. Rodriguez. I understand you've been having some problems with feeling tired and some chest pain." Emma nodded, glancing at Robert for reassurance. "It's not too bad. I just get out of breath sometimes when I'm walking long distances." Dr. Rodriguez began her examination, listening to Emma's heart with a stethoscope. Robert watched the doctor's expression carefully, looking for any sign of concern. After a few moments, Dr. Rodriguez's face grew serious. "Emma, I'm going to listen to your heart from a few different positions, okay?" The doctor's voice remained calm, but Robert caught the subtle shift in her tone. After completing her initial examination, Dr. Rodriguez stepped out of the room briefly to speak with Robert in the hallway. "Mr. Morrison, I need to be direct with you," she said quietly. "Emma has a significant heart murmur that suggests a congenital heart defect. I need to run some tests immediately, an echocardiogram and possibly a cardiac catheterization to determine exactly what we're dealing with." Robert felt his world tilt. "How serious are we talking about?" "Until I run the tests, I can't give you a definitive answer, but given her symptoms and what I'm hearing, this is likely something that's been present since birth. The fact that she's survived this long without treatment suggests she's a remarkably strong child, but—" Dr. Rodriguez paused. "Mr. Morrison, without proper treatment, conditions like this can be life-threatening." Robert gripped the wall for support. He had just found his daughter, just discovered that she had been surviving on the streets for 3 years, and now he was learning that she might be seriously ill. "What kind of treatment are we talking about?" he asked. "Depending on what the tests show, it could range from medication and monitoring to open heart surgery. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, we need to know exactly what we're dealing with." When they returned to the examination room, Emma was sitting quietly, stroking Charlie's head. She looked up at their faces and immediately sensed the gravity of the situation. "It's serious, isn't it?" she asked with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had faced difficult realities before. Robert sat down beside her and took her small hand in his. "We don't know yet, sweetheart, but whatever it is, we're going to take care of it together." Emma squeezed his hand. "You know, Mom always said that sometimes the hardest things turn out to be blessings in disguise. Maybe getting sick is what led me to find you." Robert's eyes filled with tears at his daughter's wisdom and resilience. At 12 years old, facing a potentially serious medical diagnosis, Emma was comforting him. Over the next 2 hours, Emma underwent a series of tests. The echocardiogram revealed what Dr. Rodriguez had suspected, a complex congenital heart defect called tetralogy of Fallot, a condition that affected the structure of the heart and restricted blood flow to the lungs. "The good news," Dr. Rodriguez explained as they reviewed the results, "is that this condition is treatable with surgery. The challenging news is that Emma should have had this surgery years ago. The fact that she's survived this long, especially given the physical demands of her recent living situation, is remarkable." "What does the surgery involve?" Robert asked, his hand protectively on Emma's shoulder. "It's open heart surgery. We'll need to repair the defects in her heart, close a hole between the ventricles, and widen the pulmonary valve. It's a significant procedure, but we have an excellent success rate, especially with patients Emma's age." Emma looked between the doctor and her father. "How long would I be in the hospital?" Probably about a week for the surgery and initial recovery, then several weeks of rest at home, Dr. Rodriguez replied. Emma nodded thoughtfully. And Charlie can stay with me? Dr. Rodriguez smiled. I think we can arrange for Charlie to visit regularly. He seems to be very good medicine for you. Or, as they left the hospital with a surgery scheduled for the following week, Robert realized that finding Emma had been just the beginning of their journey together. Now he faced the terrifying prospect of potentially losing the daughter he had just discovered. But he also realized something else: Emma's strength, her wisdom, and her capacity for forgiveness had already changed him in ways he never expected. Win or lose, he was determined to be the father she deserved, starting now. That evening, as Emma slept in the guest room of Robert's penthouse with Charlie curled up beside her, Robert stood at his window, looking out at the city. Somewhere out there were other children like Emma, brave, resilient kids who deserved better than the hand life had dealt them. For the first time in his adult life, Robert Morrison began to think about legacy in terms that had nothing to do with profit margins or corporate success. His daughter had shown him what really mattered, and he was determined not to waste this second chance. November 1st, 2023, dawned grey and cold as Robert sat beside Emma's hospital bed in the pre-operative area of Detroit Children's Hospital. Emma looked impossibly small in the hospital gown, but her eyes remained bright and alert. Charlie, wearing his service dog vest, lay quietly beside the bed as if he understood the gravity of the situation. "Are you scared?" Robert asked gently, holding Emma's hand. Emma considered the question seriously. "A little. But you know what's funny? I'm more excited than scared." "Excited?" Robert was puzzled. "For the first time in my life. I might be able to run without getting out of breath. I might be able to play with Charlie for hours instead of having to rest every few minutes." Emma smiled. "Dr. Rodriguez says that after I recover, I'll feel like a completely different person." Robert marveled at his daughter's optimism. Even facing major surgery, she was focusing on the positive possibilities rather than the risks. Over the past week, as they had prepared for the surgery, Robert had learned more about Emma's incredible resilience. She had taught herself to read using discarded newspapers, had memorized the bus schedules to navigate the city safely, and had even been secretly attending classes at the public library, pretending to be a homeschooled student. Her intelligence was remarkable, but it was her unwavering hope that truly amazed him. "Dad," Emma said quietly, using the word that still made Robert's heart skip a beat, "whatever happens today, I want you to know that finding you was worth everything. Even if I had known how hard these 3 years would be, I would have chosen them because they led me to you." As the surgical team arrived to take Emma to the operating room, Robert kissed her forehead and whispered, "I love you, sweetheart. I'll be right here when you wake up." But as the doors closed behind his daughter, Robert couldn't shake the feeling that the biggest challenges and the most shocking revelations were still ahead of them. The surgery lasted 6 hours. Robert paced the waiting room, his expensive shoes wearing a path in the polished floor. Patricia kept his phone charged, fielding calls from board members who couldn't understand why their CEO had cancelled all meetings indefinitely. "Sir, you should eat something," Patricia said gently during hour 4. Robert shook his head. "I can't, not until I know she's okay." Dr. Rodriguez finally emerged at 3:47 p.m., still in surgical scrubs. Robert's heart stopped as he searched her face for any indication of the outcome. "The surgery was successful," she announced, and Robert nearly collapsed with relief. "Emma is a fighter. The repairs went better than we hoped." When Robert finally saw Emma in recovery, she looked fragile, connected to monitors and tubes. But her eyes opened when he entered, and she managed a weak smile. "Hey, Dad," she whispered, "did everything go okay?" Robert laughed through his tears. Even after major surgery, Emma worried about everyone else. "Everything went perfectly, sweetheart." Over the next 3 days, Robert barely left her side. He had his assistant bring a cot, and Charlie was given special permission to stay. During these quiet hours, Emma began sharing stories about her life with Sarah. "Mom had a box of letters," Emma mentioned on the second day. "She kept them hidden under our bed. They were tied with a blue ribbon." Robert's interest was immediately piqued. "Do you know what happened to them?" "When Mom died, I could only take what I could carry. The landlord threw everything away when I couldn't pay rent." On Emma's 4th day in the hospital, an unexpected visitor changed everything. A nurse knocked on the door. "Mr. Morrison, there's a woman here who says she knew Emma's mother." The woman who entered was in her 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Emma, honey," the woman said softly, "I'm Margaret Chen. I was your mother's aunt." Emma's eyes widened with shock and recognition. "Aunt Maggie? But Mom said you lived in California." "I've been looking for you for 3 years, Emma," Margaret said, sitting beside the bed. She glanced at Robert with a reserved expression. "I saw a news story about a businessman who found his homeless daughter. I recognized your picture immediately." Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out a thick envelope. "Sarah never stopped loving you, Robert. These are copies of letters she wrote to you over the years, letters she never sent because she didn't know how to find you." Robert's hands shook as Margaret handed him the first letter, dated September 15th, 2011, Emma's first birthday. "My dearest Robert," he read silently, "Emma took her first steps today. She walked straight to your photograph, as if she knew you were her daddy. I tell her stories about you every night. We need you. We love you. Please come home." Robert's vision blurred as he read letter after letter, each chronicling Emma's childhood in vivid detail. But it was the final letter, dated weeks before Sarah's death, that broke his heart completely. "Robert, I'm dying. The doctors say I have maybe a month left. If something happens to me, please find her. Please don't let her be alone. She needs her father." Margaret filled in the missing pieces of Sarah's story. "She tried to find you for years," Margaret explained in the hospital cafeteria. "She hired a private investigator in 2018, but Morrison Industries was restructuring, and you had moved offices 3 times. Margaret placed a weathered photograph in front of Robert. It showed Sarah and 8-year-old Emma on a park bench with a small birthday cake. "Sarah took Emma to that park every year on your birthday. She told Emma they were celebrating her daddy's special day, even though he couldn't be there." Robert picked up the photograph with trembling hands. The thought that Emma had been celebrating his birthday while he remained oblivious was unbearable. "There's something else," Margaret continued, pulling out a small wooden box. "Sarah left this for Emma, something she was supposed to receive when she turned 16. When they returned to Emma's room, she was sketching in a notebook. She held up a drawing of Charlie sleeping, rendered with remarkable skill. "Emma, that's incredible," Robert said, genuinely amazed. "Where did you learn to draw like that?" "Mom taught me. She said it was important to see beauty in everything, even when life was hard." Margaret sat beside Emma's bed. "Speaking of your mother, I have something she left for you." Emma carefully opened the wooden box. Inside was a hospital bracelet from her birth, a lock of baby hair, photographs of Robert, and a letter addressed to "My darling Emma." Emma unfolded the letter and read aloud, "My precious daughter, if you're reading this, I'm no longer with you, and I'm so sorry, but I hope you have found your father. I never told you much about him because I didn't want you to be angry. Your daddy is a good man who was just scared. Your father is brilliant and driven. You get your intelligence from him. But most importantly, you get your capacity for forgiveness from both of us. If you find your daddy, please forgive him And Robert, please forgive yourself. Love each other, and remember that love is always worth the risk." The room was silent except for Emma's monitors. Emma reached into the box and pulled out a delicate silver locket, a family heirloom containing pictures of Sarah holding baby Emma and Robert from years ago. "She kept your picture all these years," Emma whispered. As Robert helped Emma put on the locket, he realized Sarah had given them a roadmap for the future. She had shown them how to love unconditionally and build a family based on hope rather than regret. But even as they celebrated this connection to Sarah's memory, Margaret glanced at Robert with an expression suggesting she had more to tell them. Whatever secrets remained would have to wait. Emma needed rest. And her recovery was still most important. 2 weeks later, Emma was strong enough to leave the hospital. Robert had transformed his penthouse into a home suitable for a 12-year-old and her dog, complete with bookshelves, an art studio, and a comfortable bed where Charlie could sleep beside Emma. But as they prepared to start their new life, Margaret requested a private meeting with Robert at a coffee shop while Emma had her final checkup. "Robert, there are things about Emma you need to understand," Margaret began seriously. "Things Sarah made me promise to tell Emma's father if he ever returned." She spread several documents across the table: IQ test results, academic assessments, psychological evaluations, all bearing Emma's name. When Emma was 9, she was tested because teachers couldn't understand why she was so far ahead of her classmates, Margaret explained. "Her IQ tested at 187, Robert. That's top 0.01% of the population." Robert stared at the results. Genius level? Beyond genius level. Emma has profound giftedness. She was reading at college level when she was 7. She taught herself calculus using library books at age 10. Margaret handed Robert another document. "This is a psychological evaluation Sarah had done before she died. Emma was showing signs of existential depression, a condition affecting highly gifted children when they become aware of mortality and suffering early." "Depression? But she seems so positive." "That's remarkable about your daughter. Most children with her intelligence and trauma would shut down emotionally. But Emma channeled her gifts into survival and compassion." Margaret hesitated. "There's one more thing. Emma has been having what she calls dreams about her future. She's described scientific discoveries, technological innovations that haven't happened yet. She's drawn diagrams of medical devices that don't exist, described solutions to problems scientists are still working on." Robert felt a chill. He thought about Emma's sophisticated comments about business trends and technology. "Does Emma know about her test results?" "Sarah told her she was very smart, but never shared specifics. She worried Emma might feel more isolated." When Robert collected Emma from the hospital, she was waiting with Charlie and a small suitcase. "Ready to go home, Dad?" she asked. Robert hugged her tightly. "More than ready, sweetheart." Emma nodded enthusiastically. "I've been thinking about improvements to your manufacturing processes and wondered if we could set up a foundation to help other kids like me." Robert marveled at his daughter's mind. Emma wasn't just his child, she was potentially the future itself, wrapped in a 12-year-old who still needed bedtime stories and goodnight kisses. 3 months into their new life together, Robert thought they had finally found their rhythm. Emma was thriving in ways he had never dared to hope. She had gained healthy weight, her color was vibrant, and Dr. Rodriguez had declared her heart surgery a complete success. She was enrolled in an exclusive private school that could accommodate her exceptional intellectual abilities. And for the first time since Robert had known her, she seemed genuinely happy and secure. But on a cold February morning in 2024, everything changed again with the devastating thoroughness that had become a hallmark of their relationship. Emma knocked on Robert's office door. holding a thick manila envelope with the same serious expression that Robert had learned to recognize over the past months. It was the look she got when her remarkable mind had uncovered something that demanded immediate attention. "Dad, we need to talk," Emma said, settling into the leather chair across from his mahogany desk. Charlie positioned himself beside her chair, as always, his intelligent eyes alert to the gravity of the situation. "I've been doing some research about Mom's death, and I found something that doesn't make sense." Robert immediately gave her his full attention, closing his laptop and pushing aside the quarterly reports he had been reviewing. Over the past months, he had learned that when Emma said something didn't make sense, it was invariably worth investigating. Her analytical mind rarely missed important details that others overlooked. Emma opened the envelope and methodically spread several official-looking documents across his desk. "I requested copies of all the police reports and insurance files from Mom's accident. I also obtained the medical examiner's report and the complete traffic investigation results." Robert stared at his 13-year-old daughter, who had somehow successfully navigated bureaucratic systems that regularly challenged experienced adults. "Emma, how on earth did you manage to get all of this information?" "I wrote formal letters to each agency, explaining that I was the victim's daughter and needed the information for medical history and legal purposes," Emma said, with the matter-of-fact tone that never failed to amaze him. "Most government agencies are required to provide public records if you know how to request them properly and can demonstrate legitimate interest." Emma pointed to the first police report, dated 3 years earlier. The official report states that Mom lost control of her car on I-75 during a severe rainstorm and struck a concrete barrier. Single vehicle accident, no other cars involved, driver error attributed to weather conditions. She pulled out another document, this one bearing the letterhead of the Michigan State Police Traffic Investigation Unit. But the detailed traffic investigation mentioned something that the initial police report doesn't include. There were skid marks from 2 different vehicles at the accident scene, and paint scrapes on Mum's car that didn't match the concrete barrier she supposedly hit. Robert leaned forward, his business instincts suddenly alert to inconsistencies that suggested a much more serious situation. "What exactly are you suggesting, Emma?" "Diggy, I think someone else was involved in Mom's accident," Emma said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was implying. "I think someone deliberately struck her car and then fled the scene, leaving her to crash into that barrier." Emma pulled out a third set of documents, phone records that she had somehow obtained through methods Robert didn't want to examine too closely. Mom made 3 phone calls in the hour before the accident, one to her supervisor at Detroit General Hospital to say she would be late for her shift, one to our landlord about a rent payment, and one to a number that I traced to a prominent law firm downtown. Robert's blood ran cold as the implications began to register. "A law firm? Why would your mother be calling lawyers?" Emma reached into the envelope one final time and produced a legal document that made Robert's world tilt on its axis. "I went to the law firm and explained who I was. After some initial reluctance, they searched their files and found this." Robert read the document with growing shock and disbelief. It was a draft of a custody petition dated just 2 weeks before Sarah's death. She had been preparing to seek legal visitation rights for Emma to see her biological father, him. "Mom was trying to find you," Emma said softly, watching his reaction carefully. "According to the lawyer I spoke with, she had hired a private investigator who had successfully tracked you down. She had your current address, your office location, everything. She was planning to contact you directly, but she wanted to make sure she had legal standing first." Robert's hands shook as he processed this information. "She found me? She was just days away from reuniting us when she died?" Emma nodded gravely. The timing seemed almost too coincidental to believe. So I decided to investigate further. Her voice grew very quiet. Dad, I hired my own private investigator to look into the physical evidence from Mum's accident. I know I should have asked your permission first, but I needed to know the truth. Robert stared at his daughter. This remarkable child who continued to surprise him with her resourcefulness and determination. What did your investigator discover? Emma pulled out a final folder, her movements deliberate and careful. The paint scrapes on Mum's car came from a dark blue sedan. My investigator found that 3 dark blue sedans were reported stolen in Detroit during the week of Mum's accident. All 3 vehicles were found abandoned and completely burned within 48 hours of the crash. The implications hit Robert like a physical blow to his chest. You think someone deliberately caused your mother's accident. You think someone murdered her. I think someone wanted to stop her from finding you, Emma said, her voice steady but her eyes reflecting the pain of this possibility. And Dad, when I started thinking about who might have that kind of motivation, I realized something important. You're worth billions of dollars. You don't have any other children or close family members. If something happened to you, who would inherit Morrison Industries? Robert's blood turned to ice as he understood exactly what Emma was suggesting. His current will, unchanged since before Emma was born, left his entire fortune to a charitable foundation managed by his board of directors. But if Emma's existence became legally recognized as his daughter and heir, everything would change. Someone would lose access to billions of dollars. You think someone on my board of directors killed your mother to prevent you from being recognized as my daughter and legal heir? I think it's possible, Emma replied grimly. And Dad, if I'm right about this, then we're both still in very serious danger. As if summoned by her words, Charlie suddenly stood up and began growling low in his throat, his attention fixed intently on something outside the office window. In the distance, Robert could see a dark sedan parked across the street from their building. A car that he now realized had been there for the past 3 days, though he had only just begun to notice it. Emma followed his gaze and nodded with the terrible certainty of someone who had learned to recognize danger at an early age. I think they know that I'm getting close to the truth. Robert immediately called building security and his personal protection team, but by the time they reached the street level, the dark sedan had vanished without a trace. Within 2 hours, Robert had arranged for round-the-clock security for both Emma and himself, complete with professional bodyguards and a sophisticated monitoring system for their penthouse. But the psychological damage was already done. Their carefully constructed sense of safety had been completely shattered. That evening, as Emma worked on her advanced mathematics homework under the watchful eyes of 2 discreet security guards, Robert made a decision that would irrevocably change the trajectory of their lives. He picked up his phone and called an emergency meeting of Morrison Industries Board of Directors for 10 o'clock the following morning. Are you absolutely sure about this approach? Emma asked, when Robert told her about the meeting, her voice carrying the same analytical tone she used when solving complex problems. If someone on the board really is behind Mum's death, confronting them directly in a group setting could be extremely dangerous for both of us. Robert looked at his remarkable daughter, who at 13 years old was thinking several strategic moves ahead of most experienced adults. Emma, if we're correct about this conspiracy, then hiding and hoping for the best won't keep us safe in the long term. The only way to truly protect ourselves is to expose whoever is responsible and make sure they face justice for what they did to your mother. The next morning, Robert entered the imposing Morrison Industries boardroom with Emma walking confidently at his side. Charlie following with the dignified bearing of a dog who understood the gravity of the situation. The 7 board members were already seated around the polished mahogany table that had witnessed countless important business decisions over the years. Their expressions ranged from curious to genuinely concerned about this highly unusual emergency meeting. "Gentlemen," Robert began, his voice carrying the authority that had built a billion-dollar empire, "I've called this meeting to discuss a family matter that has profound and far-reaching implications for the future of this company." He placed his hand protectively on Emma's shoulder. "This is my daughter, Emma Morrison. 3 months ago, I discovered that she had been living homeless on the dangerous streets of Detroit for 3 years, following the tragic death of her mother in what was reported as a car accident." Several board members exchanged meaningful glances, and Robert watched their faces with the calculating attention of someone who had spent decades reading people's true intentions in high-stakes negotiations. "The reason I'm bringing this sensitive family matter to your attention," Robert continued, his voice growing noticeably colder, "is that Emma has been conducting her own investigation into her mother's death, and she has uncovered compelling evidence suggesting that it may not have been an accident at all." Board member James Crawford, a distinguished man in his 60s who had been with the company for 15 years and had Robert's complete trust, leaned forward with genuine concern. "Robert, what exactly are you suggesting here?" "I'm suggesting," Robert said, his voice now carrying the deadly quiet intensity that his competitors had learned to fear, "that someone deliberately murdered Sarah Chen to prevent her from reuniting me with my daughter. Someone who had a significant financial interest in ensuring that I remained permanently childless and without any direct heirs." The room immediately erupted in shocked protests and indignant exclamations of disbelief, but Robert noticed with growing suspicion that one board member, David Thornton, the company's chief financial officer and a man who had joined the board just 4 years earlier, remained completely silent. His face had gone pale, and perspiration was visible on his forehead despite the cool temperature maintained in the conference room. Emma stood up from her chair, her small voice cutting through the chaos with startling clarity and authority. "Mr. Thornton, you've been remarkably quiet since we started discussing these very serious accusations. Don't you have anything at all to say about the possibility that someone in this room might be a murderer?" All eyes immediately turned to David Thornton, a man in his early 50s who had always presented himself as the epitome of financial propriety and business ethics. He was now sweating profusely despite the air conditioning, and his hands were visibly trembling. This is all extremely shocking and disturbing," Thornton stammered, his voice lacking any conviction. "I honestly don't know what to say about such terrible allegations." Emma calmly pulled out a thick folder and placed it deliberately on the polished table in front of the assembled board members. "I think you know exactly what to say, Mr. Thornton, especially since you're the person who hired the private investigator who was systematically following and surveilling my mother during the weeks leading up to her death." She opened the folder with methodical precision and pulled out several high-resolution photographs that she arranged like evidence in a courtroom. "These are surveillance photographs of you meeting with a private investigator named Marcus Webb on October 10th, 2020, exactly 2 weeks before my mother's fatal accident. Mr. Webb has since been arrested on unrelated charges involving illegal surveillance, but his complete professional files were subpoenaed as part of another criminal case." Emma placed a legal document on the table with the careful deliberation of an experienced prosecutor. "This is a photocopy of the signed contract between you and Mr. Webb, in which you hired him to follow Sarah Chen and provide detailed reports on all of her activities. You knew she was desperately searching for my father, and you knew she was getting dangerously close to finding him." Thornton's face had transformed from pale to an ashen grey color that suggested he might actually faint. Around the table, the other board members were staring at him with expressions of absolute horror and complete disbelief. David, Robert said with the quiet menace of a man who had just discovered the truth about his beloved's murder, is what my daughter is saying true? For a long moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Thornton appeared to be considering whether he could somehow deny the overwhelming evidence that Emma had systematically assembled. Then his shoulders sagged in complete defeat, and the fight went out of him entirely. "You have to understand," he said desperately, tears now streaming down his face. "When you eventually die, Robert, I was supposed to become the next CEO of Morrison Industries. The succession plan we established 4 years ago clearly put me in line to run the entire company. If you suddenly had a daughter and legal heir, that would completely change everything about my future. So you murdered an innocent woman." Robert's voice carried a deadly quiet that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. "I never intended for it to happen the way it did," Thornton said, his voice breaking with what might have been genuine remorse. "I just wanted to frighten her enough to make her stop looking for you. I hired someone to intimidate her into giving up her search. But when she refused to back down, when she actually filed legal papers to establish paternity and demand visitation rights," he couldn't bring himself to finish the sentence, but Emma completed his confession with chilling matter-of-factness. "You hired someone to kill her and make it look like a weather-related accident," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was revealing. Within 1 hour, David Thornton was in police custody, providing a full confession to conspiracy to commit murder and giving investigators the names of the people he had hired to kill Sarah Chen. The other board members, horrified by what their colleague had done and desperate to distance the company from his actions, pledged their complete cooperation with law enforcement and their absolute support for Robert and Emma. 1 year after Emma's life-saving heart surgery, Robert stood in the wings of Harvard University's packed auditorium, watching his now 13-year-old daughter address an audience of distinguished medical professionals, influential business leaders, and renowned academics from around the world. Emma, now radiantly healthy and brimming with confidence, was presenting her revolutionary ideas for using cutting-edge artificial intelligence and predictive analytics to identify and help homeless children before they fell through society's cracks. "The fundamental problem with our current approach to homelessness," Emma said, her clear, confident voice carrying easily to every corner of the prestigious auditorium, "is that we're constantly playing catch-up. We wait until children are already living on the streets, already traumatized, already sick, before we try to help them. But what if we could identify at-risk families months or even years before children actually become homeless?" She gestured toward the complex diagrams and data visualizations displayed on the large screen behind her. "Using predictive analytics, machine learning algorithms, and comprehensive community partnerships, we can create early intervention systems that prevent family homelessness, rather than simply responding to it after the damage has already been done." Robert felt his chest swell with overwhelming pride as he watched his remarkable daughter command the attention of some of the most brilliant minds in the country. Over the past year, Emma had not only recovered completely from her heart surgery and adapted beautifully to her new life of comfort and security, but she had also channeled her exceptional intelligence and hard-won life experience into solving real-world problems that affected millions of vulnerable children. The Emma Morrison Foundation, which they had established together using a significant portion of Robert's personal wealth, was already implementing pilot programs in 12 major cities and had successfully prevented family homelessness for over 300 at-risk families. But perhaps more importantly to Robert, Emma had remained fundamentally unchanged by success and recognition. She was still the same compassionate, generous child who had offered her last $20 to help a complete stranger in a parking lot. As Emma concluded her presentation to thunderous, sustained applause from the Harvard audience, Robert thought about the incredible, often painful journey that had brought them from that chance encounter in a Detroit parking lot to this moment of triumph and recognition. After the presentation, as they walked together across Harvard's historic campus with Charlie trotting contentedly beside them, Emma looked up at Robert with those remarkably intelligent green eyes that still reminded him so powerfully of himself. "Dad, I've been thinking seriously about what should be the next major initiative for our foundation," she said, her voice carrying the same passionate intensity she brought to all her projects. "I want to expand our programs to include early identification and support of intellectually gifted children in underserved communities. There are probably thousands of kids out there with cognitive abilities similar to mine who never get the chance to develop their full potential because they lack access to appropriate educational resources." Robert smiled, not at all surprised that Emma was already strategically planning their next challenge. Her mind never seemed to rest, always moving forward to the next problem that needed solving. "That sounds like an absolutely excellent idea, sweetheart. What specific approach did you have in mind?" "I envision creating mobile testing and support units that can travel into urban and rural areas where traditional educational resources are severely limited or completely non-existent," Emma explained with characteristic thoroughness and attention to detail. "We could establish partnerships with public libraries, community centers, religious organizations, and yes, even set up comprehensive programs in homeless shelters and transitional housing facilities." As Emma continued outlining her ambitious plans with the same systematic precision she brought to everything she undertook, Robert marveled at how perfectly her exceptional intellectual abilities had been paired with her extraordinary capacity for empathy and compassion. She wasn't using her remarkable gifts to set herself apart from others or to gain personal advantage. Instead, she was dedicating her talents to lifting up those who society had forgotten or abandoned. "You know," Robert said as they reached their car, "your mother would be incredibly proud of everything you've accomplished and the person you've become." Emma's expression grew thoughtful and slightly melancholy, as it always did when they discussed Sarah. "I think about her constantly, every single day. Sometimes I find myself wondering what our lives would have been like if she hadn't died, if we had managed to find you together as a family." Robert had wondered about the same alternate timeline countless times over the past year. "Do you think you would have been happier if events had unfolded differently?" Emma considered the question with the same serious analytical approach she applied to all important matters. "I think I would have been fundamentally different as a person. The 3 years I spent surviving on the streets were absolutely horrible in many ways. I was hungry, cold, scared, and sick most of the time. But those experiences also taught me things about human nature, social systems, and personal resilience that I never could have learned any other way." She paused, looking up at her father with wisdom that seemed impossible in someone so young. "Those years taught me what real poverty actually looks like and feels like. They taught me what it means to be completely invisible to society, to have people walk past you as if you don't exist. They taught me how quickly circumstances can change, and how important it is to help others when you have the ability to do so." Emma smiled with the same radiant expression that had first captured Robert's heart in that parking lot over a year ago. "I think everything happened exactly as it was supposed to happen, Dad. Mum's death was a terrible tragedy that I'll never fully get over, but it led me to you. And now, because of everything we've both been through, we can work together to help other kids who are facing the same challenges I faced." Robert hugged his daughter tightly, overwhelmed by her maturity, wisdom, and resilience. "I love you so much, Emma. More than I ever thought it was possible to love another human being." I love you too, Dad, and I know Mum loved both of us enough to make sure we found each other when we needed it most. As they drove home through the streets of Boston, Robert reflected on how their story, born from tragedy and misunderstanding, shaped by loss and separation, but ultimately redeemed by love, forgiveness, and second chances, would continue inspiring others for years to come. Emma Morrison had not only found her father and received justice for her mother's murder, but more importantly, she had discovered her true purpose in life. Together, they would change the world, one homeless child at a time, carrying forward Sarah's legacy of love and compassion while building a future filled with hope and possibility for families who had lost everything but still dared to dream of something better.